Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Katie Allen, the Executive Director of Project Peace, and on behalf of our board and staff, we're excited to welcome you here this evening. We're very grateful to have David French with us, and we're looking forward to a great conversation. For those who are new to us, Project Peace believes that justice and mercy aren't just ideas. They're practices lived out in our neighborhoods, schools, and churches. We envision an East Bay where every neighbor is treated with dignity and where everyone has the opportunity to flourish. And we pursue that vision by partnering with local churches to mobilize people to serve, learn, and seek justice together. Events like this one tonight are one way we put our mission into practice, by providing space to learn from thought leaders and reflecting on the ways we can respond to those ideas with humility, hope, and action. We're especially grateful for our partnership with the Trinity Forum, whose work models what it looks like to engage thoughtfully and humbly in public life. So here's what to expect tonight. Our keynote speaker, David French, will give opening remarks. Then Bart Garrett, the senior pastor of this church and also the founder of Project Peace, will join David on stage, along with Cherie Harder, the president of the Trinity Forum. They will share a conversation covering themes of faith, polarization, and faithful presence, and will conclude with time for your questions. So now I'll introduce the voice helping frame our conversation this evening, our speaker, David French. David is a New York Times opinion columnist writing on law, culture, and religion. He's a constitutional attorney, a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and a former constitutional litigator. His recent book, Divided We Fall, America's Succession Threat and How to Restore Our Nation, addresses the challenges we face as a country today. David's talk will explore the church's role in this cultural moment and how we can pursue justice in an increasingly polarized world, a timely and urgent issue. David, it's our honor to welcome you here tonight.
Well, thank you so much for hosting me. I tell you, Northern California, the Bay Area, is one of my favorite places on earth. If I could remotely afford to live here, I'd consider moving. And I just want to go ahead and give a shout out to the person who gave 2 claps when just my name was mentioned. I like you already. So I'm going to talk about... It's kind of some irony here that we're with Project Peace on day 2 of a new war. I'm sure we'll get into that in the conversation, but that's not what I'm going to talk about in my opening remarks. In my opening remarks, I'm going to talk about the question of the day. Can people of faith, can believers in Jesus help unify and heal a very bruised and wounded land? And I think the answer to that is yes, we can, but... Yes, we can, but. What is the but? The but is we have to repent first. Now, let me explain what I mean. If you want to go back and if you want to look at the state of the United States of America, we can talk about a lot of issues that are weighing people down. I just made a joke about one, affordability. I just did not make a joke about the other, armed conflict. There are many things that are weighing us down. But if you could combine it here domestically into one overarching phenomenon, what is the thing, what is sort of the poisonous seed that has created sort of this tree of division and anxiety? And I would label it with one word: hatred. Hatred. We have come to hate each other in this country. Now, I just want to go ahead and say, when I'm speaking to you all, I'm not talking about y'all. Y'all aren't hating people. But there's a lot of hatred out there, an enormous amount of hatred. And hatred has a cancerous effect on a body politic. Almost anything that we pursue for the public good can become tainted by hatred. I'll just give you a good example from my own life and my own career. I spent much of my career before I was a journalist as a lawyer. I was specifically a First Amendment lawyer. I was a free speech lawyer. Now, one thing that you learn about being a free speech lawyer is you learn how to get along with people who, how shall I put this, can be a little eccentric. a little out there, because the way free speech works in this country is most of us don't really go close to the lines. Most of us don't really, most of us are rule followers, I mean, in most respects. And so if we know there's a line out there, we're not going to really go up to the edge. But my entire legal career was built on people who loved dancing on the edge of that line. But I will tell you, it was wonderful for me. It was wonderful for me because I was able to interact with people with whom I had profound disagreements. They were able to see me, even though they knew I disagreed with them, with a friend and an ally, because in the bottom line was, I was there for them when they needed it, when their most fundamental freedoms were at stake. And there's few things that can bind you to another person more tightly, more closely, than defending the rights of others that you would like to exercise yourself. And so I feel like I was in this little micro bubble. And I want to put the emphasis on micro because the number of civil libertarians that exist in this country, you can fit in one of the few vanishing phone booths that still exist in this country. But I had grown very accustomed to being around people with whom I had profound disagreements. It didn't bother me. It was normal. It was fine. And then I began to, as I left my litigation profession and I entered into the wider world of writing about all of the things that are happening in the country, I began to really fully experience the level of hatred that people have for each other across the partisan divide. And this is not a brand new phenomenon. So if you go back to 2014, which can sometimes feel like really ancient history, but 2014, their Pew Center did a study and it was talking about American polarization. And it surveyed people and asked Republicans, what do you think about Democrats? Do you strongly dislike, somewhat like, or strongly like? Well, 81% of Republicans either strongly disliked Democrats or somewhat disliked Democrats. Now, it was not even. You go to the Democratic side of the House, they were more tolerant, as is befitting their reputation. Only 78% of them strongly disliked or somewhat disliked Republicans. And so you begin to see you have this kind of beginning seething rage, or at the very least a lingering animosity. And then you began to see some really interesting polling results, for example. So here was one. People are more likely to want their son or daughter to marry a person of a different religion than of a different political party. So I'm sure many of you have heard that statistic, and it's not even close. It's not even close. So what happens, what does it mean in practical terms if you're more concerned about your son or daughter's partisanship than you're concerned about their faith practice? Then maybe I might suggest that the partisanship is the actual faith practice in that circumstance. And so what happens when hatred begins to metastasize? Well, when hatred begins to metastasize, what it means is that you and I, have very little emotional investment in the good of the other. We have, in fact, a lot of emotional investment in the bad of the other. You have a lot you want to, and you begin to fight against, and people begin to fight against a temptation to, for example, want to see your political opponent sad or angry. You begin to take joy or a degree of happiness when your political opponents are upset or defeated. You begin to relish in their failure or perhaps long for their failure, even if their failure could perhaps mean consequences for neighbors. Even if their failure could perhaps mean consequences and very negative consequences for the country. This is what begins to happen to us when we become overrun with partisanship. And when I talk about partisanship, I do not mean, I want to be very clear, I do not mean voting Republican or Democrat. I do not even mean running for office as a Republican or a Democrat. What I mean when I mean partisanship is I mean when it becomes part of your identity. This is who I am. Or a primary. If it's going to be part of your identity, it should be relatively low. But it becomes a primary part of your identity. I have seen this again and again and again. The following things happen. Number one, when you become heavily partisan, You are extremely willing to believe negative news about your opponent. Extremely willing to believe it. If you hear that so-and-so politician that you didn't like or so-and-so TV pundit that you didn't like maybe is involved in a scandal, well, I saw it coming. Did you see their position on tax rates? That's adultery waiting to happen right there. Yeah, we're just so eager. And sometimes we also people get a little bit of joy about it because it feels like a vindication. I knew they were bad. But then you hear a negative word about a politician that you like, or a negative word about a politician you maybe admired for some time, or maybe you see as absolutely indispensable and key to defeating the hated foe. Well, that can't be right. It cannot be right. What's the sourcing on that? Did you get that from Fox? Did you get that from the New York Times? By the way, one of the least enjoyable things is going back to my hometown and saying, yeah, I work at the New York Times now. Not a lot of love, but so we are in this world in which we become very willing to receive the ill report about our enemy, and we become very unwilling to receive a good report. We become very willing to find a way to suppress the liberty of our enemy, and we become very unwilling to see any limitations placed on our own side. Not long ago, it feels like forever ago, but it was really not long ago. It was in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, and I know nobody likes to talk about this. I don't like to talk about it. But there was a point where I was kind of pulling my hair out. That's exactly what happened here. I was pulling my hair out about a lot of the conspiracies were floating around. And I was just thinking, I was writing a Sunday newsletter at the time for the Dispatch. And I thought, I want to go down and see what the Westminster Catechism has to say about the 9th commandment. Okay, thou shalt not lie. Okay, so what is and if you've ever read the Catechism, and I'm sure everyone here has it by their bedside table, it takes one of the 10 commandments and it just blows it up. Like here are all of the implications of this very short set of words. Here are all of the implications. And there was right there in the Westminster, in the Catechism was this concept, and it stopped me in my tracks. And it said, you should be unwilling to receive an ill report, and you should be willing to receive a good report. You should be seeking to protect the good name of your neighbor. Wait, what? Totally, completely countercultural to the moment that we're in. Totally and completely countercultural to true partisan politics. And as I continued to read through it, I was just convicted to the center of my soul of those own flaws in myself. Because while I don't view myself as a partisan, I have an opinion or two about things. And I had found myself sliding into this same phenomenon, where if I had marked or written somebody off as a problem, as they're malicious, as they're cruel, as they're oppressive, or whatever, I found myself very willing to receive all information that would reaffirm that. And I found myself reluctant to hear the information that wouldn't. And that's exactly the opposite of our command. And so why would I say, okay, this is sort of laying the foundation for we hate each other. We hate each other. Now, why would I say Christians can be the solution to this, but we need to repent? The reason why I say we need to repent is because the more partisan a community is, just the numbers say this, the more partisan a community is, the more likely it is to be afflicted by many of these maladies, and the more likely it is to become quite extremist. And so one of the things that has happened, there's a 1999 law review article written by Cass Sunstein, a Harvard law professor. And if you remember nothing about what I tell you tonight, remember this concept because it's going to explain a lot, okay? What Cass Sunstein found, gathering research for generations, was that when like-minded people gather together, they become more extreme. It's called the law of group polarization. Okay, so when like-minded people gather, they become more extreme. And what's sad is they don't even know it. They don't know they're becoming more extreme because why? Everyone around them agrees with them. Now, this is a very easy thing to sort of understand in practice. Like, let's suppose you have 6 people in a group and they're all opposed to gun control. The more time they spend together talking about their opposition to gun control, do you think that they end up doubting themselves more? No, they reaffirm. And if you are in support of gun control and you get together with a small group, do you end up doubting yourselves more? No, because there's no one there to present a counter argument. There's no one there to stop the train of the group dynamic. And here's where it gets kind of scary. That if a like-minded group deliberates long enough, then the entire group becomes more extreme than the most extreme individual was at the start of the deliberation. So here's what's happening to American politics right now. We used to have this big bell curve, called it the big American middle. It's not a big American middle anymore. It's flattening out. The extremes are getting bigger, the middle is getting smaller, and it's gone from a bell curve. It's not quite a U yet, so there's hope, right? But it's more flat. It's more flat. And then the other thing that you will find is some of the most partisan people in the United States of America are regular churchgoers. Regular churchgoers are among the most partisan people in America, and it's the most partisan people in America who hate their opposition the most. So what does this mean? What this means is that for all too many of us, it is believers in Jesus Christ who become drivers of division. It is believers in Jesus Christ who have been taught, hopefully from the moment that you knew who Jesus was, that we're to love our enemies, that we're to pray for those who persecute us, that we're to turn the other cheek, that we're to go the extra mile. It is the people who follow Jesus who are also extremely partisan. And so on the one hand, many, many, many millions of followers of Jesus would never say in a million years, they would never say, I hate my enemies. They would never confess to that. They would never say, the Beatitudes are weak and squish. They would not say that. But they believe every negative thing that they hear about their opponents. They believe that the church itself could fall if they don't defeat their opponents. And that does dark things to our souls. It turns us against our neighbor. I was talking to the pastor here earlier, and he said, you are blessed to have a remarkably diverse congregation. I was like, how can you bottle that? How can you bottle that? Because that's what America needs. It needs people who have strong disagreements, who can sit side by side in the pews, worship the same God, and then go and maybe after church have a tough conversation and love each other all the way through it. Because it's only in those communities that we're going to learn how to do that as a country. And so I think one of the things that the church needs to do is we need to repent, not of seeking justice, that's a biblical command. But what we need to repent of is partisanship. And again, when I say partisanship, it's not voting for somebody, it's not even running for office, it is the identity. It is the identity, it is the priority, it is that partisan identity, it is that partisan priority. It is poisoning us. And fortunately, we have a couple of wonderful models of how to do this. Cherie and I have worked together for a long time on a curriculum for Christian political engagement called the After Party, and the centerpiece verse on that, Cherie helped us introduce it to the world at a great event in DC a few years ago. The centerpiece of that is Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you, O man, and what is good? I don't know does anyone in here remember the old E.F. Hutton commercials? There's a couple, I'm sure you do. It's like, but here's the setup for you, millennials and below. Everyone's at a crowded restaurant and two people are talking over a drink, and he says, well, where are you investing? And one guy says, my broker is E.F. Hutton. And E.F. Hutton says, and at that moment, the whole restaurant goes quiet. and everyone leans in. Well, I look at the beginning of Micah 6:8 as an E.F. Hutton moment, because it says, what does the Lord require of you, O man? What is good? Well, and I've got a Bible passage that begins like that. I'm leaning in because I'm getting a summary. And here's what it says. It is to act justly. It is to love kindness. And it is to walk humbly before the Lord your God. Now, let's break down each one of those three words very quickly, I promise. What's so important about act justly? The focus there is on justice. It is not on power. That is a critical difference. You can act justly without power. You can seek justice without power. Just ask Rosa Parks, for example. Just ask the entire civil rights movement, for example. Would anyone say in a million years that they were squishes on justice? No. But would anyone say in a million years they are Machiavellians grasping for power? No. In fact, one of the most convicting things you can do in this modern political age is go back and look at the pledge cards that Martin Luther King Jr. required the protesters in places like Birmingham, where they were about to be attacked by dogs and hoses. And look at the pledge card. What does he ask of people? To meditate on the ways of Jesus, to respond with evil with love. And there's this really interesting point in there, and it says, we seek reconciliation, not victory. That's mind-blowing to us, because so many of us think we can achieve justice if we have victory. So if you believe you can only achieve justice when you have victory, what does the priority become? Victory. If you can only achieve justice when you have power, the priority is what? Power. Where are you going to see that in Scripture for followers of Jesus as a priority? You won't find it. But then we move on. Justice is critical. It is not optional. But there's two other values that are not optional either. Love, kindness. Man, this one's hard. When people are cruel to you, when people are mean to you, when people slander you, when they threaten you, when they try to intimidate you, can you still be kind? It is so difficult, but it is not optional. This is one of the things that I think is so important for Christian believers to understand is no matter what somebody does to you, you are not relieved of your obligations of love and kindness. And how do we know that? From Jesus himself. He was suffering intensely, and what is one of the last things he said before he died on the cross? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The people who were murdering him. So love kindness. And then the last one might be the hardest of all. Walk humbly. We don't know all the answers. I will tell you one thing that is being someone in my position where people ask me to speak and things like this, I often worry that I give the impression that, well, I've figured all this stuff out, this Constitution thing, just ask this guy. Middle East, got it. No, I have thoughts and ideas based on experience and education, but that's what they are. They're my best shot at it. So how do we walk forward in this moment? I'll give you a little slice of hope. I will tell you this. Right now in the United States of America, people are hungry for kindness. They are starving for it. They are starving for love, starving for it. And so if you can walk into any kind of circumstance, almost any kind of social circumstance, and walk in with a posture that begins with humility, what do you think? Tell me about yourself. I want to know about you. I want to know about your thoughts. I want to know about your life. And then respond to the story that they tell you with genuine affection. You will revolutionize that social setting. You will revolutionize that community. Because what you will find is that people will turn to you like you are an oasis in a desert because you are. So here's how I would say, can the church heal this country? I absolutely think through the power of Jesus, not our power, yes. And I think that it absolutely can by recentering on his model and his example. That's an Old Testament verse, I said. The New Testament version is love God and love your neighbor. That's the New Testament version of it. In reality, what that means is giving people the benefit of the doubt. It means listening to them. It means caring for them. It means reaching out to them even if they have hurt you and maybe even harmed you. Now, I realize there are circumstances that's not prudent. I got that. I understand that. So we have to use wisdom and discretion. But if we can, if it is right, if it is proper, to even reach out when we've been wounded and we've been hurt. And I think right now, and more than any other time since in the last decade, I'm experiencing conversations and times with people where this will matter. I wish we would do away with this huge, even though I just spent a lot of time talking about the ninth commandment, hypocrisy alert. I will wish that we spent a little less time on the 10 Commandments and a little more time on the Beatitudes. Because this is a Beatitudes moment in the United States of America, and we have to be a Beatitudes community to rise and meet it. Fearlessly knowing that we serve the creator of the universe, who is unbothered by the power of any earthly throne here, and who came at a time of even greater oppression to a people who are deeply oppressed and didn't create a political revolution. He just went ahead and did this little minor thing of defeating death and hell. And because he did that, we can look at this community, we can look at this culture, and we can look at this nation, and with the full confidence of an eternal hope and an eternal future, we can love our enemies until we can knit this land back together. All right, let's move over to the tables, or the chairs.
Thank you so much, David, and so glad to have you all here. Thank you for the kind introductions of all three of us, Katie. We appreciate you and your work. Just a couple more words of introduction, and then we're going to have a conversation and then open it up to you. David, I have been an admirer of yours for many years now. This is why I even wore this jacket, hoping you would wear one similar. That's not true.
He saw this as the only jacket I ever wear, so.
You're also my second favorite author in your family.
Fair.
Yes. And you're my second favorite host of the Advisory Opinions podcast. Sarah Isker is my favorite. You're second, though. You're right.
Out of two. I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, you have just been a seminal voice for me as a pastor, trying to do the things that you are summoning us to in your talk. So I am often coming to your writings, your podcasts, your opinions, so thank you. It's a delight to have you here. And Cherie, with the Trinity Forum, I was introduced to the Trinity Forum through Os Guinness' book, Steering Through Chaos, which was one of the books I read in seminary. And as we launched Project Peace years ago and launched our own speaker series, we've kind of always envisioned or dreamed or prayed, what would it be like to have sort of an East Coast, West Coast representation? And I'm so glad that Katie and Cherie made that connection, and I'm delighted to have you here as well. So Cherie, you're gonna ask the first question, but if you wanna give us a word on the Trinity Forum, please feel free to do so.
Great, well, thank you, Bart, and so good to be here. Just really appreciate the invitation from Katie and from Bart to join you all. So as Bart said, I lead a group called the Trinity Forum, and what we seek to do is to cultivate, curate, and disseminate the best of Christian thought for the common good. And we do that through a variety of ways, including different conversations and lectures very similar to what we're doing tonight, through a whole series of publications like what Bart mentioned, through Socratic forums and pastors' breakfast and reading groups and discussions, but also through our senior fellows who we believe embody some of the best of Christian thinking. Our senior fellows include David French, as well as an audience member out there, Mark Laverton. So the work that they do in a variety of different disciplines and sectors, we want to come alongside them and basically amplify, encourage, and also encourage cross-pollination. And do that in order to not only have a civic impact, but also to help leaders live, lead, and work wisely and well. So it's just a real pleasure to be with you all tonight. And David, as we launch into discussing your very meaty talk, one of the things that occurred to me is you made a very important point about our identity. And you mentioned the Jonathan Haidt study that basically showed that the vast majority of Americans, including, unfortunately, it has to include some evangelicals just by how many there are of us in the country, actually are more concerned about what party our children marry into than what faith. And of course, at the basis of our faith, supposedly, is a sense of our identity is with Christ. And that is supposed to inform as well as form and transform our entire lives. So I'm interested in your thoughts on what has happened in terms of either a lack of formation or active deformation that so many of us are confused about where our primary identity lies.
That's a great question. And I feel like when it comes to politics in particular, because that's what we're talking about is the political culture, the church writ large has done a terrible job at forming people for political engagement. The key word there is engagement. Because what we have done a very good job is in teaching people what political policies that any given brand of Christianity should pursue. And so it becomes, what does it mean to be a Christian in politics? Becomes something along the lines of this. Well, a Christian in politics is going to be, if you're in the conservative camp, you're going to be pro-life, you're going to be for religious liberty, etc. If you're a more liberal camp, you're going to be deeply anti-racist, you're going to be very pro-immigrant. And so these are these policies that you're trying to pursue. But the problem is that if you're looking scripturally, Scripture doesn't say very much about policies. You can read the New Testament. Let's add in the whole Old Testament. Let's add in the Apocrypha, just for fun. Throw in some C.S. Lewis, maybe a dash of John Calvin. You're not going to find much policy there. You're just not. You're not going to find a whole lot of instruction, for example, on what is the proper way for a president to take a country into war. Just to be very current, right? But you know what you will find? It's an enormous amount of commentary on how we love our neighbor in a very concrete, interpersonal way. And the interesting thing is, and we've been together, and I've made this point before, we get this in other areas. So like somebody might say, what does it mean to be a Christian businessman? They're not going to say, to make all the money I can for the glory of the Lord. That's, a pastor's going to sit down and say, it's not that I want you to fail, but that's not the priority. They would say, well, I want to be honest with and deal fairly with my customers. I want to be kind and compassionate and just with my employees. I want to be good to my peers in my workplace. All of these are the how that you interact. If you ask somebody, what does it mean to be a Christian student? It's the same thing. You're not going to hear immediately, all A's for the glory of the Lord. No, it's going to be, I want to treat my my peers well, my friends well. I want to be an example of the love of Christ in this community, etc. And then when we get into politics, all of that tends to fall away, just completely, because in politics, it's the outcome that matters. It's the outcome that matters. And so then when you begin to focus on the outcome that matters, this is where our human nature kicks in, then that is a very short hop, skip, and a jump from the ends justify the means. And then when we take that approach, that is when we start tearing each other apart. And it's one reason why you sometimes see very odd behavior out of otherwise really great people, that they coach their kids' little league team, they're serving in the homeless shelter. But if you just knew them from their Twitter feed, you would think they were monsters. But then the same person, when people come at them for being monstrous on Twitter, they think, you've totally misjudged me. Do you not see me at Little League? Do you not see me at church? No, you import all of who you are. You don't have a Christ-free zone in your engagement with other people. And too often, it's as if we've taken our politics and said, as long as we're getting the godly outcome, Christ doesn't have to be in the process. And that has been poisonous. When we were launching the after party, we had a lot of conference calls with pastors. And I was repeating, begin with the humility. talk about kindness. And I kept getting this question, what if that doesn't work? It's like, what do you mean work? Like it's not, it's not walk humbly and act, and love kindness unless injustice results. No, it's act justly, love kindness, walk humbly, unconditional obligations. And we're making the unconditional conditional to achieve the results we want to achieve. And people can see this, and they can see that when the chips are down, there will be people of faith who will abandon the teachings of their own religion for a particular political outcome. And one thing that broadcasts very loudly and clearly to people is maybe they don't actually believe in their religion. And that's in many ways the worst outcome.
I can't resist one very quick side story before I ask my question. Sheree mentioned Dr. Mark Laberton is here, and he was a wonderful mentor of mine in Berkeley for many years. And so this afternoon, I'm getting ready to come over here, and I tell my wife, I saw the registration, and Mark Laberton will be there. Gosh, I wish he could facilitate. And my wife said, yeah, I know. So wherever you are, Katie, I love you, and Mark, thank you for being a mentor. So I actually wrote my first question down because I wanted to get the wording, but it really connects to something you were saying about midway through your talk where you said there's this great fear that the church could fail if it does not become partisan. So I'm about to shake things up here with this question. This is the way I put it. So often we believe the president is our God, the party is our church, and the platform becomes our ethical code. Yet, and here's where it gets saucy, the Republican Party is the party that often endeavors to conflate Christian faith and politics. So G.K. Chesterton talks about when the state and the church get in bed together, it's usually the church that gets kicked out. So what is our responsibility as pastors to address that dynamic?
Oh, that's a great question. One of the things, we could call this the Constantine temptation. It's just been around forever. It's just been around forever. And look, one of the things that we have to be empathetic to people who are taken hold, that the Constantine temptation takes a hold of them. And here, let me give you the Steelman version of why someone would say we need to be entangling church and state a bit more. And that Steelman version goes back to Micah 6:8. David, doesn't it say act justly? God's laws were instituted for the good of men. God's laws are good for all people, whether they're believers or not believers. So in many ways, if you are withholding, if your political project is not trying to incorporate God's laws into every human enterprise, including politics, then you are not only in many ways defying the will of God, and we'll get to the Jesus example in a minute, you're not only defying the will of God, you're actually harming your neighbors. And so for your own good, this exercise of power is necessary. And in the legal world, it's become called common good constitutionalism, which is a sort of more religious influenced, more authoritarian vision of American constitutional law. And, it's one of these things that when you say it, it can sound pretty good. Like, it can sound pretty good. I remember, do we have any fans of the show The Crown in here? Okay. Early in season 1, there was this really interesting moment when the young Queen Elizabeth interacts with the much older Queen Mother. And she provides a beautiful statement about what it means to possess the divine right of kings. And she said, the prime minister, and I'm brutally paraphrasing this. I'm a nerd. I'm not nerdy enough to have instant recall of Crown dialogue from season 1, but you're going to get the gist of it. The prime minister answers to the people are fallen. I answer to God, and God is perfect. And it is by the perfect will of a perfect Lord that I exercise my authority. And when you say it like that, it can sound kind of good. It can sound nice. But the problem is, 2,000 years of history. Because what ends up happening is all of these beautiful ideas are then channeled through human beings. They're channeled through human beings. And human beings are very good at taking a beautiful idea and turning it into their own self-interest. So that it's not just God's divine law that is best for you. It is my specific interpretation of God's divine law that is best for you. Is it correct? Is that right? Probably not. God's law, God's intent for human beings, God is the creator of the universe. We can't really fathom his mind. I mean, we often skip over verse after verse in the Bible that says, we know in part, we see through a glass darkly. And so, one of the things that I love about, and I'm not somebody who's going to stand up here and say that this is the right form of government. Like, this is the godly form of government. There have been Christians who've lived and died and flourished and in many different systems of government. But this is one of the reasons why I appreciate the way in which we have disentangled church and state in this country, and the way we have created instead a small L liberal democracy, because a small L liberal democracy rests on two vitally important truths. Here is truth number one. Every human being possesses incalculable worth. This is in the opening of the Declaration. We're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. We're all created equal, endowed with inalienable rights. So we all possess incalculable worth. And number two, we're all profoundly fallen. We all are profoundly mistaken. So that's Federalist 51, James Madison. That's Federalist number 10, James Madison. In Federalist 51, James Madison talks explicitly about if angels were men, we wouldn't need to check or balance the power of the rulers. But angels are not men. Men are not angels, right? And so one of the first things that is happening is that people are becoming so walled off and so closed into their own worldview that they're losing the capacity of seeing the other side. And when that happens, it becomes much more tempting to try to seize all of the power, because you have already seen yourself as possessing all of the virtue, and you see the other side as possessing none of the virtue. I will just very quickly, one thing that gave me a huge amount of empathy, because I grew up and for my evangelical Democratic friends, I grew up Republican. I was a Reagan kid. I was a delegate for Mitt Romney in 2012. I was Republican. And then in 2016, I left the Republican Party. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. But in 2024, I wrote a column that said I was going to vote for Kamala Harris. And we don't need to rehash all of that. But
that could be fun, though.
I'm very happy. I'm not. I wrote it in I wrote it in our New York neighborhood newspaper. So, but what happened next was shocking to me, because I received message after message after message that was, I was willing to believe that you still had some shred of Christianity when you voted third party, but now I know you're not a believer. And I thought, there's a lot of friends of mine who are Democrats who are in the pews every single week, who have been and especially in the South, in a very minority position. Like, they're not a whole lot of Democrats when they look around. What have they been dealing with for years? What have I not seen? Because I was in the majority group, right? And so all of this really began to trigger in my mind, there is a great way to test the virtue of an organization, the virtue of a church, the virtue of a party, the virtue of a nation. It isn't how you treat your friends. It's how you treat the people in the out group. It's how you treat them. Because almost any group is pretty good at being nice to its friends. But who can be good? Who can be kind? Who can be just towards the out group? And to me, that's been a fundamental challenge of the church and the fundamental challenge of our nation for a long time.
Historically, a lot of political polarization has been over policies, disagreement over what's better or worse, right or wrong. But there is a new and growing form of polarization, which is over what is true or untrue, real or unreal. Mm-hmm. And not surprising, along with our confusion and our conflict over what's real and unreal, there's also a big rise in conspiracy thinking. And you've written at different points about Christians do not seem to be immune from this. In fact, at one point, I think it was around 25% of evangelicals affirmed some or all of the QAnon conspiracy theory.
Evangelicals were more likely to affirm the QAnon conspiracy than any other group.
So I wanted to ask you both, what hope do you see of us getting back to a commonly held truth? And along with that, you've also said that it is very difficult to argue someone out of a conspiracy theory. So for those of us who have friends and loved ones who are into conspiracies, what then does one do?
Oh, man. This is hard. Okay. So two things here that I think are really important. In the law, a conspiracy is defined as a combination of two or more persons. So a conspiracy is another name for a community of small or large size. And that's super important when you're talking about getting people into and out of conspiracy theories. So when you're dealing with somebody who is in a conspiracy theory, the first thing you have to realize is they are in a community they believe in and that brings meaning to their life. Think of the days where there was the guy all alone in his basement, like your great uncle or whatever, and he had a bunch of UFO maps and all of that. Well, all of those guys have now found each other, thank you, internet, right? And so now we have community. So we have a community right there. And this community gives them an immense amount of meaning and purpose. And they're vulnerable to the conspiracies because, let me go back to the word that I said, hate, before. So if you hate somebody, if you think, for example, let's talk about the 2020 election conspiracy. If you've been taught the Democrats hate America, they want to destroy America, they want to destroy Christianity, they want to destroy religion. You've been around people who've used a term I hear all the time in the South, democrat. Well, then it's a short trip to steal an election. It's easy to believe that those monsters would do that, right? And so the hatred creates the fertile soil. The community makes it stick. So what do? Well, I'll tell you the last thing you do. If you've got your meaning and purpose out of a community that is rooted in deep fear and hatred of the other, a fact check doesn't do it. Hey, Mom, I saw this article in the Times. I know, you get together with your best friends 4 days a week to talk about these issues, but if you read this, no, when somebody reads something like that, here's another interesting fact. When I was researching my book, I found that if you're highly partisan and you encounter a negative fact, it triggers a fight or flight response. So a negative fact, not a negative argument, a negative fact, you have an involuntary physiological response to it. That's when you're deep. That's why you got to avoid that deep dive. And so number one, know that a conspiracy is a community. Number two, how do you actually persuade people? You mentioned Jonathan Haidt. Love this analogy. He says, think of a human being as an elephant and a rider. The rider is the rational mind. That's the one that says 2 + 2 = 4. That's the one that says until recently the Southeastern Conference was the best football conference. That's, all the common sense stuff. But the elephant is everything else. It's your upbringing. It's the place where you live. It's your ethnicity. It's your sort of disposition. It's all of these things. And he said, this is the truth. If you persuade the rider but not the elephant, rider can't go anywhere. But if you persuade the elephant, the rider comes along. Now, he said the best and most holistic way, because if all you do is persuade the elephant, that's manipulation. But if you hit the elephant and the rider, that's where you're bringing the whole person along. And so I just tell this story because there's so many ways to talk to the elephant. When you meet a person, think, I want to talk to the elephant. One of my best friends, his mom just got completely lost in these conspiracies, completely lost. It was fracturing their relationships. They couldn't even be in the same room together. And this is a mother and son who've been tight ever since I've known them for 40 plus years. And they were fracturing over politics. And then one day, my friend's mom said to him, honey, have you seen this basketball player? I think his name is John Morant. And he says, no, Mom, it's Ja Morant. He plays for the Memphis Grizzlies. And she said, well, he's fun to watch. I've been watching some basketball lately. And so my friend jumps on that and she says, Mom, come over for every Grizzlies game. Let's watch the games. And so they just watched basketball. Now, I'm very upset because John Morant barely plays anymore because he's injured all the time, and he has a disturbing habit of waving around firearms in strip clubs, which has led to some suspensions. It's a thing. It's a whole thing. But what I'm saying is, find the point of connection and build from there. Don't go first to the point of conflict. Go first to the point of connection. Because you cannot replace something with nothing. If you're asking someone to give up their conspiracy theories, you're asking them to give up a community. You're asking them to give up a purpose. You better have a community and a purpose that's waiting there like with open arms.
I'm going to ask one more question to prime the pump for Q&A, but Cherie, did you have one more you wanted to ask? I don't want to leave a question off.
Sure.
I talk too much. I'm so sorry.
Go for it, and then
okay.
I'll ask the last one,
Perfect.
and we'll open it up. Yeah.
You know, one thing we have not talked about yet is social media. And in many ways, social media just seems primed to very much deepen our polarization, as well as the hatred you described. I think there was an Atlantic article that found that misinformation on social media actually spread 6 times as quickly, was much more likely to penetrate, to be liked, to be engaged with. And I guess I would love to kind of hear you talk about essentially kind of what hope do you see for us communicating love and kindness when so much of our public communication media is biased towards malice and misinformation?
Boy, this is an old problem. I mean, this goes back to, some of the critiques of evening news back in the day. If it bleeds, it leads. Well, now take that and put it in a handheld device that can feed you, it bleeds, it leads 17 times, a minute, right, as you're scrolling through. Look, I think that the first thing that we have to do is just say to ourselves, I don't know that I can handle social media. I don't know that I can. Imagine, let me reframe my thinking about myself and say, instead of saying, all y'all can't handle social media, why don't we reframe it and say, do I need to rethink how well I can handle it? And I say this to myself as well, because recently I was, one of the very negative things about my job is I feel like I have to be on Twitter. And I keep asking myself, do I really? And then I feel like I do, and then I don't. But the other day I was scrolling through, and I saw a little short video. There was some influencer somewhere in America, I don't even know where, that his shtick, if he sees anybody walking around with wired headphones, he takes scissors and cuts their headphones. Just right there, right? And it's like, I watched him do this, and I felt myself getting angry. I was like, okay, all right, I get it. It's annoying seeing people walking around in their own worlds, but that's not your stuff, dude. And then I stopped, and I was like, this is what the algorithm wants. This is a dispute that does not involve me. I don't even know what city. I don't know the dude. I don't know the victim of the crime. And here I'm mad for some period of time, and I'm thinking, can I handle social media? I've been talking to everybody else about handling it, and so I do think that we have to understand and just be very humble about ourselves. And I think one of the things that helps us maybe moderate and change our habits is we're actually much more influenced by experience than education, but social media works as a form of experience. And so if you see somebody, let's say you're conservative or you're on the right, and you see some kid get their MAGA hat knocked off their head in a Burger King in Des Moines, you feel that visceral. It's like you've experienced it. It's like I was there, I saw it, I was right there. And it makes you mad. Or conversely, if you have some MAGA kids bullying, like a young immigrant in an elementary school or a middle school, you see it, you feel it, you hear the yells, the screams, the noise, and you experience it, and it gets in here in a way that reading about it in a newspaper never would. I think of we had a race riot in my high school when I was a senior. And for me, I was right. I was, it came down the hall. It was just very, very violent, very, very scary, kind of rolled over on top of me. It was an experience I'll never forget. I will never forget the armed guards patrolling the halls for the whole rest of the school year. It was horrible. It was horrible. And then I went on newspapers.com and I found the local newspaper account of it. Dry as a bone. Dry as a bone. But I thought, if we'd had cell phone video, it would not have been, right? And maybe the whole country would have gotten angry at that. And so that's what happened with it is there's no easy fix at all, but I think it has to begin with us asking ourselves, are we able to handle this? And then moving outward from there.
I echo that sentiment as a pastor, yes. I think for time's sake, I'm not going to ask my last question just because I want to give you guys some space to ask questions.
What if I promise to give a short answer?
Okay, short answer, just to kind of prime the pump here. Back to the two words in the title, polarization and unity. So I remember Yuval Levin, American Enterprise Institute, mid-2000s, kind of talking about we've had this halcyon moment of non-polarization, kind of whether that be Clinton, but everyone sort of got along. Mm-hmm. That is no longer true, and part of Levin's critique is actually we used to be more polarized than we weren't. Now we're just experiencing it again. Your book comes out, COVID happens. I read your book, I thought, gosh, this would make an amazing movie, and now it feels like it's becoming a reality.
We're living it. Yeah.
So I'd love to hear you riff for a moment on what does the future look like with respect to polarization? But then the second word, unity, so second question, how is there is a veneer, there is a counterfeit, there is an artificial unity that does not look like Micah 6:8. So bring us back to an authentic unity.
Yeah, the artificial unity that breeds polarization is when we think of unity as agreement. Because I'll give you a perfect example. I was riding in an Uber the other day, and the driver and I were having a nice conversation. I tend to talk to my Uber drivers because I'm very upset my wife's rating is higher than mine, and I think it's because I tip, I'm always there, but anyway.
It might just be she's a better author.
She writes better books. And she said, I just wish we could get together as a country. I wish we could stop fighting. And I was like, I'm totally with you. Now, remember, a lot of my stories, because I'm from the South, are going to code one direction. I said, I'm totally with you. I'm so sick of the fighting. She goes, if we could just get rid of these Democrats. And I was like, okay, that might be the problem here. But Tim Keller told me something several years ago, well before he died. He said, I'm worried because a few years ago, the younger folks in my church could get together and have a Bible study or go out to dinner, and they could disagree on important things and remain friends. Now I do not see people disagreeing on important things and remaining friends. And so if unity is designed to be centered around agreement, we're lost. This country is too big, it's too diverse, there's too many different strains of everything for us to center around unity, around agreement. But if our unity can center around love, then we're cooking with something. I'll just, right before questions, super short story. I fly into Iraq in November 22nd, 2007, a reservist joining the 3rd Cavalry Regiment during the surge. I was the only reservist in the unit, 800 active duty guys, me. No, I didn't know anybody, they didn't know me. I was the lawyer, which then made me super popular. And one guy greeted me right when I got off the helicopter. And he said, Captain French, I'm Leo Broadhead. You're bunking with me. And as we were walking, he's asking me about myself. Make a long story short, Captain Leo Broadhead and I could not be more different. He is a Mexican-American immigrant, former Mormon, former Catholic, current agnostic who says he only believes in the Hubble telescope because it can see farther than anybody. I'm a white, Southern, evangelical. He was all in on Obama before it was cool. I was all in on Mitt Romney, and it never got cool. But we were inseparable, that entire deployment. And he did something for me I'll never forget. If there's former members of the military in here, you'll know that you might be familiar with the term battle buddy. It means you go somewhere, if you're in a hostile environment, even if you're on your base, you always have somebody with you, always. And so if I was going to go to chapel, I needed somebody with me. And so every single week, agnostic, Hubble worshiping Leo went to chapel with me so that I would always have a battle buddy. And he didn't have to do that. He just did it 52 times-ish. So then when we were redeploying, I had some connections through law school in the Obama campaign, and I got him prime tickets to the first inaugural as a thank you. And here's how he rewarded me. I'm sitting there at home, sad, because George W. Bush's helicopter is leaving, and in comes Barack Obama. I'd supported Bush, he'd supported Obama. And I get a video, and it is of Bush's helicopter from my friend Leo, Bush's helicopter lifting off, and Leo singing, na, 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 na. And I wouldn't want it any other way. I wouldn't want it any other way. So unity, but we would do anything for each other. Unity is not agreement. Unity is love.
Well, thank you. Wonderful transition to some, you can clap, yes. If you attend this church, you know I'm very passionate about creating what sociologists call great good places, third places for us to have disagreement and to still love one another. And I feel like the church is one of the last vestiges of that reality, and I want to fight for it. So that's what Project Peace does, having conversations like this. Thank you again for being here. As we think about questions, the best questions have question marks. So not a moment for your platform, but a wonderful moment to ask questions. Are you the roving mic, Devana? Is there only one? Okay. Oh, we have another one, Emily George. So if you have a question, just kindly put your hand up. And also, actually, they will hold the microphone for you. So as you ask the question, they'll just hold it for you. So.
That's what a bonus.
Yes.
There's somebody very
right
eager
here.
all the way in the back.
Hi. So you touched on this a little bit with the elephant and the rider, but I would love to invite you to drill down on it and unpack it a little bit more and hear what you think. At your opening remarks, you pointed towards hate as the root of the division and rage that we experience. But anger is often a mask of another emotion. And so I would posit that it's fear, like our unwillingness and discomfort with sitting with and unmasking and facing our own fears and our inability to face what it would look like to hand that over to the goodness of God and his sovereignty. And so I'd love to hear you touch on that.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up because they're very closely related. The reason why I brought up hate is because if you actually look at the way in which our neighbors describe each other, it's hateful. But I think that the root of a lot of that hate is it's generated and born out of fear. And that this fear has led, then sort of when it's fully flowered, it becomes hatred. And look, the one thing that I think we have to realize is that a lot of that fear has been intentionally cultivated in our communities. It has been a product of, one of the products of the change in political messaging away from something more aimed towards persuasion versus mobilization, which are two very different concepts. And so what we're dealing with is, look, we're all flawed people. When we live in difficult times, it is very natural to feel fear. You know, if I look and I see a new conflict breaking out in the Middle East, if I see a nuclear armed power fighting and losing 1.4 million casualties, and the Ukrainians losing hundreds of thousands of casualties, and Putin consistently rattling the nuclear saber, there are things out there when you see some of the unbelievable brutality being meted out in the streets of American cities, sites I never thought I would see that are more reminiscent of things that we saw in the 1960s in Selma on the Edmund Pettus Bridge than things that we thought we would see in 2026. It is very understandable that people can be afraid. That's very understandable. And so, but what do we do with that? What do we do with that fear is the question. And there's all too many voices in our country who look at that fear and they see an opportunity. That if you're nervous, you're alarmed, you're worried, you're a potential follower, you're a potential voter. And so they're going to want you to lean into that fear. Now, look, there's not much that any given church can do to combat that. But we have to know what is happening. That people are feeling very natural fear. So we can't condemn people for being afraid. So like right out the get-go, if we're getting there going, well, if you're a Christian, you shouldn't be afraid. No, if you're Jesus, maybe, but we're not. We're going to be afraid sometimes. And I feel like instead of meeting people at their fear and cultivating anger, it's very important that we meet people at the fear and understand where their fear is coming from. And I'm not saying give people false hope, because sometimes things are bad. I was in Kyiv in May of 2023 when the city was hit with the biggest hypersonic missile attack that had ever happened to that point in military history. This dude was afraid, right? But it was so valuable for me because I got to understand how Ukrainians were afraid every day and how legitimate that fear was. So how do we approach the fear? Do we approach the fear as an opportunity to cultivate a following? Or do we approach the fear as an opportunity to cultivate faith? And I think there's very different approaches and very different paradigms. And that's why I ended my remarks earlier with, Jesus came to a time of deep political oppression where there was very legitimate fear of the Romans. And he didn't overthrow the Roman Empire. He did something better than that. He overthrew death. And that if you live in a world in which death has been overthrown, then if you really imbibe that, if you really get that, then fear begins to lose a bit of its sting. It begins to lose a bit of its sting. And so that's why I think that ultimately, as a Christian, I believe the answer to fear is the person of Jesus Christ. It is not a particular political project. It is not a particular set of arguments, although they can help or hurt. But the answer to fear is the person of Jesus Christ. But I really, rather than condemning fear, we need to understand fear, because a lot of it is rooted in very real things.
Hi, thank you very much for coming. I have observed about 90% of the time when I have seen a left-leaning and a right-leaning person talk about an issue that's really important to them, I have noticed that one or both have said, I don't want to hear your view.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that last thing you just said.
When I've heard people from the left and right talk to each other, about 90% of the time, one or both of the parties says, I don't want to hear your side. I know what I believe. I don't want to hear that. How can we persuade people to share, like you and Leo? I love that. I'm so envious of that. How do we get people to at least be willing to have a civil talk, perhaps to learn more, to understand their thinking, to deepen their thoughts? How do we get them to do that if they're refusing to listen? Let's assume they've already got rid of hatred. How do we open them up?
Oh, boy, that's hard. Look, there's nothing that's going to work all the time. We know that, right? You can have every conversational trick in the book, and you will encounter people who have hard hearts. And they maybe at that point and that time in their life, the conversation is not going to be fruitful. I'm not naive. I know that is true. Absolutely. But my only answer to that is we have to lead by example. So when I get in a tough conversation with somebody, I say, I'm going to make two promises to you. And it's really tough. If I know this is going to be hard, I'm going to make two promises to you. Number one, I'm going to do my best not to offend you. In other words, when I articulate, I want you to know from the bottom of my heart, I'm not trying to inflict any pain on you, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that my words are seasoned with love and grace. At the same time, you can't offend me. In other words, I want you to feel very free to talk to me. Say what you think, how you think it, and I will hear it. It might be hard for me. I might not like it. But my promise to you is I'm not going to cut you off, and I'm not going to stop you. You go first. In the way that, and sometimes that doesn't work. And often it's done much more quickly than that. Like, I promise I'm not going to try to offend you. I promise you can't offend me. I heard it all. Just go. But to make that pledge to people that I am looking out for your good, and I'm 100% open to your voice, and then show it. I think it's the only way through. And you're going to notice the theme of what I'm talking about a lot tonight. A lot of it is it just starts with us. It just starts with us. Social media, fixing social media starts with us. Fixing tough conversations starts with us. And again, I know, I am not naive. I know there are times when it can get harmful and dangerous and you got to get out of there. You got to cut it off. But we should be slow to pull that trigger, and we should be ready to receive even hard words from another human being created in the image of God who is sharing their heart.
I'm a pastor teacher, and there's almost a social contract that comes with that I may not make any references to anything political, even if the biblical passage absolutely screams for it. So this is kind of the opposite of the previous questioner. People are so afraid that if politics comes up, the discussion is over. So how do we overcome that side of it?
Yeah, that's another great question. It's actually very similar to the other answer, which is we have to be, in my view, demonstrate our openness to another person's point of view, but also at the same time, we can't be afraid to talk politics as if there is something too dangerous for Christians to address. Because the reality is, the more important it is in the moment, the more Christians should be all over it. But with a particular grace and with a particular love and with a particular humility, but without forsaking justice. I don't know about you guys, but I grew up I was born in Alabama, raised in Louisiana, Tennessee, and Kentucky. So I come by my Southeastern Conference partisanship very honestly. And growing up as a son of the South, I'm 57 years old, so I was at the tail end of the Lost Cause teaching. So I was in college before I heard anything other than Lost Cause mythology. And so, growing up in that environment, that what I found was, talking about this point about politics, what I found was that there was such a consensus that there was almost no room for other thought. And then when there was no room for other thought, then so many people resisted the civil rights movement, white Southerners resisted the civil rights movement because it caused conflict, right? Because it caused conflict. It wasn't nice, it was disrupting things, it caused conflict. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of white Americans swallowed their tongues for years about grave injustice, because they didn't want to mess with the smooth waters of their community. And so that's not an option. We can't do that. We can't say when justice is at stake, we're going to swallow our tongues because, well, it might cause problems. So I don't know about if any of you did this who've grown up in the South. I tried to look up what my relatives were doing in the 1960s. And one really neat thing is I found that my grandmother, who had been widowed at an early age and went and got her master's degree, one of the things she did as her act of defiance was she wrote her master's thesis in the middle of massive resistance against states' rights, which took some guts back then. I was proud of her. But what that taught me was, and this is I've shared this on a podcast or two. In this moment, there's a lot of injustice, and your descendants are going to be looking at a future in X number of years. They're going to be asking, what did mom, dad do? What did dad do? What did my uncle do? My aunt? What did they do in this moment? And all I got to say is, make sure they find something. Make sure they find something, and it's more than a tweet. Right? Or it's more than a Facebook post. And so we can't forsake justice because justice is hard and contentious. The way we ameliorate or try to moderate the contentiousness is through the other two prongs, humility and kindness.
We could do this all night, but I think we have time for two more questions. So it was one up front. Here we go.
I believe that you mentioned that the church is one place where we can bring together people of different opinions in love and consideration and understanding. What I fear, Pastor, is as I look into this audience, I see 60, 65% of the people gray-haired like me. When I look at my church in San Francisco, I see an awful lot of gray hair and not much dark hair. How do we reach the people in their 25, 30, 35 to 40? Where are they?
Yes, right over there. Love it.
Is this a question for me?
Go for it.
Well, firstly, not everyone with gray hair is that old. Yeah, I think it's a great question. Part of my side job is I coach church planters, and you'll be encouraged to know there are over 60 church planters in our network, and there are a lot of churches that are young and growing, and that's right here in the Bay Area. So I think we're finding ways for sure. But yeah, great question.
Yeah, also, I just think love God, love neighbor. It's not love God, love pew neighbor, right? You should love your pew neighbor, no question about it. But go out, get involved, get engaged in the community. And it's not for this like, hey, I'm David, I'm engaged in the community. Would you like my Jesus tract? No, it's go, get out there, get in the community, meet people where they are, and understand, we've talked about this a lot right before the event. There's a lot of talk in the air about revival right now. I'm skeptical. I don't see it in the numbers, right? But anecdotally, wherever I go, there's an enormous amount of interest. There's an enormous amount of interest in spiritual things. They may not be wanting anytime soon to come into a church on a Sunday morning, but the interest is there. It's just there. And so I'm really trying to lean into it. And I will tell you, in my columns, when I write about faith in the Times, I get 5 times the response of anything else I write about. Easy. And that's probably low-end estimate. People will tell me their stories, and it will wreck me. Like just their stories of loss and longing, and I wish I could answer them all. I have this pledge to my readers: if you write me an email, I will read it. I just can't always answer it. And the stories are unbelievable. So there is a yearning, there is a longing. And I look at my column as a way of kind of bringing people into or trying to introduce some of these deep and loving and lovely truths to people who might never darken the door of a church. And then also, finding things in pop culture that can communicate to people, not in the cheesy youth pastor way. I mean, no offense to youth pastors. Sorry, okay, I've just heard one too many Ricky Bobby Talladega Nights analogies but anyway, I watched this beautiful movie. It's called The Testament of Ann Lee, and it was about Ann Lee, who's the founder of the Shakers. And I walked out of that theater in tears. I minimized it in the Times. I said I had tears in my eyes. No, they were coming down. And they were coming down for a very specific reason. And that reason is, just to tell the story, very, very, very briefly, Ann Lee was the founder of the Shakers, the Shaking Quakers. She was brutally abused in England. She comes to America seeking freedom. When she comes to America, one of the first things she sees is a slave auction. This was a radically egalitarian group. They were men and women, black and white, Native American, colonists. It didn't matter who you were. It's a radical religious movement, especially for the day. They walk past a slave auction. It's the first thing that they see. When they move out into the countryside, and they were a very small group for many reasons. One of them, they were radically egalitarian, and number 2, they said no to all sex. That was not a crowd pleaser. And so they move out into the community, and the Patriots, the colonial army, takes her away because she won't pledge allegiance to the Patriot cause. So she's brutally imprisoned in America, where she went for freedom. George Clinton, one of the underestimated heroes of the revolution, lets her out, says, we do not imprison people for their piety in this land. And then she's beaten basically to death by her neighbors who believed that she was a heretic. And there was the scene at the end is when it wrecked me. It just wrecked me. And it was her casket underneath a beautiful painting of a tree. And then I just remembered, because right before that moment, right near when she died, she had received the news that George Washington had defeated Cornwallis at Yorktown, and there was a hope of liberty. And she literally fell to her knees in gratitude for that, even in spite of everything this new country had done to her. And at the very end, there's her casket underneath a beautiful painting of a tree. And it reminded me of George Washington's favorite Bible verse that he shared almost 50 times, including most famously to the Hebrew congregation of Rhode Island. Every man shall sit under his own vine and his own fig tree, and no one shall make him afraid. And I thought, there are still too many caskets under the tree. We're not sitting under the tree in peace. And I just think, in this moment, with so many people so hungry, that's the message. I want you, I'm going to go find you, and I want to assure you, I want to tell you, whatever our disagreements, however different we are on the spectrum, I will do everything that I can in my power as a columnist. Woo, that's powerful. As a columnist and podcaster, I shall do everything in my power to make sure that you can sit under your own vine and your own fig tree, and no one will make you afraid. And that's a message that will travel outside the walls of the church.
Amen. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. We're going to make that the last question. That's a fitting conclusion. My apologies if we didn't get to your question. 2 words of thanks, and then Katie Allen is going to kind of tell us where to go from here. Cherie, firstly, thank you for being here. I am incredibly excited about a coast-to-coast partnership with Trinity Forum, so we're just so grateful to have you here.
Be here.
And David, as your tears expressed, I have read you, listened to you for many years now, and I think what I admire so much about you is you put following Jesus first. And I just thank you for being here and sharing with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
David, I echo Bart's thanks for helping us think with clarity and humility about what faithfulness requires in this divided age, and for doing it with a dose of humor. I know we all appreciated that. And thank you to Bart and Cherie for guiding such a thoughtful conversation this evening. As you continue reflecting on these themes, we invite you to stay engaged with Project Peace. Join us for a future speaker series event, register for a day of service, or you can consider making a gift to continue to sustain this work. There's a card at your seat that has a little bit of information about how you can continue to stay connected to us. We also encourage you to explore the thoughtful resources offered by the Trinity Forum. They've generously provided a copy of their reading, the Federalist Papers, which includes a foreword by David. You should find that at your seat as well, along with a card that has some information about their organization and how you can stay connected to them too. I want to extend my sincere thanks to David for being with us this evening. Thank you for coming out here. And to Walnut Creek Presbyterian Church for hosting us so generously tonight. I'd also like to recognize our Project Peace board members. Would you all please stand for a second? Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your leadership. And if anyone has questions and you caught a flash of someone near you who stood just a minute ago, they would be a great resource for you. And with that, I'll close and just thank you all for coming tonight.